Thank you one more time for taking the time to join me in the presentation of this book. Let us imagine that we have our favorite drink at hand so that we are like in a music studio, listening to a record for the first time and just having fun. And I hope that my presentation is fun enough. I decided to call this presentation multimodal and conceptual because when I was thinking about the redesign of the books, I was thinking about a book that was not a book that was in itself a multimodal text, a book that in itself helped teachers just to granulate every single part of it with a purpose. And conceptual because one thing that I really strive to do, and I hope that I had been able to do, is to be very intentional about the concepts, to inform teachers and students about the moments, about the learning experiences in which they are addressing the key concept and the related concepts. So the marriage of multimodal text and conceptual was my goal. And I'm going to take you on this journey with me today. There are 5 key areas that I took into consideration for the redesign of this series. First is standards and practices. And the reason why I considered standards and practices is because, as I said, I did not want to create just a book, just a textbook. I wanted to create a book that if teachers did the majority of the activities that I proposed, and they took a picture of those activities, those engagements served as evidence for evaluation. That was very important for me. So focusing on standard C3 was key. Another thing was criteria and strands. As we know, the MYP is formative by nature, and we have to find a way to guide students to construct and to build their linguistic capabilities and their conceptual understanding so that they perform effectively in the summative assessment. So I wanted to find a way to scaffold each of the strands in each criterion so that teachers and students realize what they are doing, why they are doing it, and where these will guide them. I also wanted to create a statement of inquiry that explicitly showed the relationship among the concepts. So what you will see in this new series is a statement of inquiry that is shorter, that goes to the point, and that is reflected in each of the engagements that you will see in the chapter, not only in the summative assessment, but throughout, in every picture, in every question, in every task. As I said before, I wanted to indicate where the key concepts, global context, and related concepts are being addressed so that you don't feel deceived, so that you understand, so that we as teachers, as educators, understand where the emphasis has to go, and so that we help the students make the connection between grammar and concepts, between texts and concepts, between interactions and concepts. And finally, I wanted to produce a multimodal text guide. And by this, I mean a set of guidance that help teachers and students understand the type of texts that they have just read or listened to. I redesigned this book also with a differentiated mind. I thought about new schools, about schools that begin their MYP journey and they do not have teachers with experience, or they have never framed anything in the format that the MYP wants us to frame things. So I thought about a tool that hopefully helps those schools, should they decide to adopt or to use my books, to plan things. I wanted to think about a reflection of the subject guide and the MYP framework. And by this, I mean, I did not just want to focus on language. I did not just want to focus on the grammar and the concepts and everything, but I wanted to find a way to integrate service. I wanted to find a way to integrate interdisciplinary connections in each chapter so that teachers feel motivated to extend, to make connections, and so that they can see that it is possible to do service through that curriculum, which is a requirement in the NYP. Also, we know that a book in the NYP is very difficult to serve every context in the world. And that was very important to me. So when I decided on how to reshape the themes that I had already developed, I thought about experienced teachers who may like 1 or 2 or 3 units or chapters in the book, and they adopt the chapters. I also thought about those teachers that are very good at creating their own resources, but they may like my multimodal text, or they may like the pictures, or they may like some of the activities that I plan in the book. And they use my books as anchor texts. That means as a repository to complement their courses. And then I also thought about the teachers that want to differentiate, and they want to have differentiated resources to differentiate for students at a lower level of language and for students at a higher level of language as well. So the diversity of activities and learning experiences that I created, hopefully will help teachers that are new and want to learn how to deliver the NYP, and teachers that have experience and want or look forward to enriching their teaching processes. So for standards and practices, as I said before, I took into consideration the 16 practices in standard C3. So throughout the books, you will see activities that reflect each of these practices. And as I said, if teachers decided to take pictures of these engagements, automatically they will get the evidence that they will need for the moment where the NYP goes through evaluation or through accreditation. Not thinking about this would be very irresponsible, because I could not say that my book caters to NYP educators if I do not take standards and practices into consideration. What is more, we know that next academic year will be a year of transition for the new standards and practices. So in order to avoid doubling the work for teachers, I took the new standards and practices and already embedded them or thought about them in the design of the book, so that when we transition to the new standards and practices, the tweaking that teachers will have to do is only labeling. This was very important to me, giving the book a sense of life, a sense of extended practice and use, and not a book that is going to die in 2 or 3 years when we shift to new standards. I will begin now with one of the biggest changes in the book, which are criteria and strands. As we know, in the past guide, criteria C and D had to be assessed together for summative purposes, and we had to do that twice, once for writing and also for speaking. And if we wanted to tackle each strand, we had to do it twice again. So for example, D1, which is the one that addresses grammar and vocabulary, we would have to do that for speaking and writing. And it was very difficult to keep track of what we were doing and then find the best fit. So what I wanted to do, as I said in my introduction, was to find a way to inform teachers and students about what strand of which criterion each task looked like, so that they understand, or so that they begin to see that the learning that each strand promotes or suggests is very different. On the top right-hand side of this screen, of your screen, you will see the 3 strands of criterion A. And right below that, you will see 2 tasks. And it may be the letters may be very small for you to read, but you can see how I have labeled the tasks according to the strand that they are tackling. Why? If you attended my multimodal and concepts and inquiry workshop, this may be similar, this may sound familiar to you. When we teach listening or when we teach reading, it is very different when we do it for comprehension purposes or when we do it for analysis purposes. So what I try to do is to give teachers a hint of the type of questions that we use when we teach a text, when we teach listening in this case, for comprehension. and then give them another set of questions so that they become aware of the multiple type of questions that we can use to analyze texts, to analyze the conventions. And like this, doing it in a formative way with shorter texts, teachers and students will become familiar with different types of questions, which eventually will strengthen their comprehension skills and will help them to perform successfully in the summative assessment. The same thing for criterion B. The boxes in pink on the right-hand side can help you see how I try to classify the activities according to the strands. So when we do reading, you will see the 3 different types of activities for texts, not just the typical comprehension questions. They will still be framed in the form of questions, but the way that they engage students, what they require for students to do, will be very different, and will take them to explicitly address one of the strands. The same happens for criterion C. And what I value about the way that my team helped me craft criteria C and D tasks is the fact that we get to see the complexity, the fact that strand 1 is vocabulary and sentences, that strand 2 addresses the structure of the sentence, that strand 3 addresses the way in which we create logic by creating sequences of sentences. And it's until we address strand 4 in this case that we talk about clarity and efficiency. For criterion D, it's exactly the same thing. And what we should see is that it's until we bring in strand 4 is when we start writing with a sense of audience and for a specific purpose. Something that was very important for me is to help teachers and students see how the concept of pattern works. And what I decided to do is to create activities and give examples of the type of sentences that teachers may want to consider to guide students to produce. And the reason why I decided to promote or to provide some examples of sentences using these patterns is because these are the type of sentences that students will need when they produce the summative assessment task that I prepared at the end of the chapter. So in a way, being aware of how we are playing with the vocabulary and the structures will help the students to use the language creatively. On the left-hand side of your screen, you can see a task. You can see how from the top, you have the title of the activity, the ATL skill that it promotes, and then you have the instructions. In the instructions, you see estructura and patrón in orange. Those are related concepts. So this is how I am signaling to teachers and students when they are addressing these concepts. And then in the 3 examples that you see some color coding to help teachers and students see what are the words that they can replace. There is no correspondence in the colors. It has to do more with the words that you can replace and the words that you have to retain. I will now talk about the statement of inquiry. As I said before, one of my goals was to create a statement of inquiry that was short, that was concise, but that expressed the relationship amongst the concepts explicitly. Something that we could see it, something that a statement in which we could see this relationship, a statement that we could actually say, a statement that is understandable, and if it's understandable, that it's debatable. But the most important thing, considering inquiry-based teaching, which is one of the things that we have to promote in the MYP, is something that encourages teachers and students to investigate. So in a way, the statement of inquiry as the guiding statement for the unit, for the chapter in this case, serves as something that we have to prove. something that we have to challenge, something that we have to refute if necessary. So all the activities that we will do in one chapter, in one unit, aim to help a student see how these concepts interact with one another, and whether what the statement of inquiry says is true or false, whether it applies to the context or not. If yes, why? If not, why? And the guiding questions that I have planned for each chapter are more intimately related to the statement of inquiry. They are not expansion of the inquiry. They actually help teachers to distribute them throughout the chapter. So here are chapters 3 and 4 for one of the books. And what you will see below the number, you will see the statements of inquiry. And if you are familiar with the first edition of my books, you will see that these statements of inquiry are shorter, are more concrete, are more concise, and right now we are able to see the relationship between the concepts. These are two more examples for units 6 and 5. One of the things that is very important for me to mention is that, as some of you may know, I work with Dr. Lynn Erickson and with Dr. Lois Lanning in the Concept-Based Curriculum and Instruction Training Institute. And I wanted to redesign the books and be faithful to concept-based curriculum and instruction, so that this engagement or this disconnect that we sometimes see between CBCI and the NYP is gone. So that right now both systems work effectively and we are doing proper concept-based teaching and learning. I will now guide you through a tour in which we're going to explore, what you will see, how I inform teachers and students when they are looking or when they are addressing the global context, the key concepts, and the related concepts. These are 3 screenshots from different parts of the book. And those of you that read Spanish, you do not need translation, but I will translate them. In the very first one on the top, the second line says, explore different aspects of people's identity. Identity is one part of the global context. So this is how I'm giving teachers and students a hint that this is a connection to the global context. The one in the middle says, pay attention to the following text and reflect on the elements, on the communication elements that transmit a message. Communication is a key concept and message is a related concept. So with this little label, I am informing teachers and students that through the following learning experiences, they are going to be explicitly addressing these 2 concepts. And in the one at the bottom, it says, consider the following multimodal text and reflect on the purpose of communication. Purpose is a related concept. Communication is the key concept. So this is how I am informing throughout the book to teachers and students when they are addressing each of the aspects. Everything has done intentionally so that it's natural, so that it's not forced. These are some more activities. On the activity on the left-hand side, you can see meaning and message highlighted. In the one in the middle, you see globalization and sustainability. And on the one on the right-hand side, you can see purpose and communication. So besides the ATL skills that each learning experience promotes, which is right now more intrinsically linked to language because the new guide places a specific emphasis on language, I am also giving explicit instruction on how to tackle, how to address these concepts. Multimodal texts are not new in language acquisition. If you remember a few years ago, we had visual interpretation, and then we had strand 2 in the last guide. What happened right now is that it's become more emphatical. It's become more emphasized, and therefore we have to enrich the type of text or the diversity of text that we use in our classes. This is one thing that I try to do. For each of the themes, for each of the chapters that I designed, I took 3 things or various things into consideration. 1, the grammar. With the grammar that we are teaching in this chapter, which are the natural texts that can be produced using this grammar? For the topic, the theme that we are exploring, what are the texts in which relevant information about this topic or about this theme can authentically be found somewhere in the world? And then, which text can serve as a model for students to compare conventions with other texts? So this text that you see on the right-hand side is one for Unit 1. It's a poster where students use the adjectives in the learner profile in order to produce a poster that is supposed to be persuasive to explain why a person is the best candidate to be the school president. And what you see on the right-hand side is what I was explaining before about guidance to help teachers and students understand the conventions of the texts. So for each of the text types that I present, I provide a brief explanation. In phase 1, clearly this suggests that teachers will have to guide students to understand this. So this is more for the teachers at the very beginning. But I help teachers and students, I try to help teachers and students to understand what are the conventions that need to be paid attention to when analyzing a text, and in a way, transfer the information for the times when we have to produce those texts. This is another example. For topics such as the timetable, teacher qualities, student qualities, I really had to think about the scenarios in which they would appear in order not to make them forced. And in this case, we are exploring the school, and this is a website, as you can see. And as you can see, it's packed with little details that can help you, teachers, inform students about the structure and the function of the different sections on our website. And the convention box, the information box on the left-hand side, gives guidance again about the goal, the purpose of communication, and the uses of this text. This is another example with an email. And with these 3 examples that you have seen right now, you can see how with this new framework of multimodal text, I am hoping to be paving the way for DP, so that when students arrive in DP, their understanding of text types has already been consolidated. And for teachers who may not feel at ease or completely comfortable in addressing explicitly all the different modes of language, all the different modes, all the different purposes of communication, and who may not have an idea about how to guide students to see how they can write with a sense of audience, that information will be in those boxes. These are more examples. On the one on the left-hand side, this is where I give teachers hints about the purpose of communication and how we can recognize the purpose of communication. And that's precisely what we are going to see in the next examples. One of the things that I have done in the new edition also is to label the texts at the very beginning, in the very first units, with the type of purpose that they have. The reason why I decided to do this very early, even if students do not have the language, again, it's for teachers to help students become aware of the structure of the language that is used and the look of these texts. The text that you see on the left-hand side is an informative text. And you can see that the structure is very different from that text on the right-hand side, whose purpose of communication is to persuade. And by doing this, I also give teachers and students a hint about the kind of language that we need for writing information text, the kind of language that we need, and the kind of grammar that we need for producing persuasive texts as well. And then in the boxes, in the activity boxes, we have a very short activity. Both of these activities are to assess strand 1. And by doing small readings and simple activities, we are building comprehension, but we are not losing touch with strand 2, which is the conventions of the text. I'm going to make a pause right now to welcome some more people, and I will welcome some of your questions. If anybody has some questions, please let me know. Just turn on your mics and ask me a question right now before I go into what COVID taught me. No questions? Very good. I will proceed. One of the things that that motivated me a lot in the redesign of the textbook, and the reason why we delayed the publication 1 month, is what we are seeing right now. We do not know if we are going to be back in school, as we know. And when I discussed this with the publisher, I asked, could we find a way to make the book more dynamic, more flexible, so that most of the information that we have in the book is also available for teachers and students somehow, some way. So what I also have included in the book to support remote learning are links. Links not only to the videos that students will watch, but videos to webinars. Webinars that you can use to support the teaching of texts. Webinars that you can use to support something that you have already taught. Webinars that you can use if you want to flip your classroom. Webinars that you can use as a review. I try to include as many multimodal texts as possible, and I try to include as many digital resources as possible as well. And before I talk about all the things that are included in the teaching and learning pack, which is the equivalent of the teacher guide, I will begin right now presenting and sharing the books to you. I will begin with the book for phases 1 and 2 for grades 9 and 10. I'm going to be making stops at specific pages, and what you will see two spreads. You will see the page that you would have on the right-hand side and the page that you would have on the left-hand side, as if you had the book opened. At the beginning of each chapter, as in the past edition, we have all the conceptual framework that you will need to transfer that onto your unit planners, or for you to understand all the elements of the MYP. And as you can see in the tasks, every task is now labeled with the criterion and the strand that it tackles. One of the things that I am hoping that teachers value in my doing this is that since now you know that strand 1 and 2 have to do with vocabulary and grammar structures, if you feel that your students need more input, you stop there. You stop there and you keep on teaching and enhancing that vocabulary and grammar before you move on. This is something that I shifted from the other book, in which I had a lot of text first, and then students had to guess the grammar as they moved. This time it's completely different. We start with language, grammar, we move on to concepts, we move on to texts. So I am hoping that this gives teachers an opportunity to realize where they have to extend, or to realize which activities they don't have to do because students already did it. Everything that you see in an orange box is an opportunity for you to extend to other subjects and to create interdisciplinary connections. A lot of the pictures in the book, I turned them into a text. And by doing that, now that pictures are not isolated, we have an opportunity to analyze them, or to have comprehension questions about them, or to have students practice vocabulary. Here is in this box on the right-hand side. This is where you can see how I try to give you help with conventions. And what I am going to do in the chat box, you don't have to do it right now, but I am going to share one of the webinars that you can use. This is at the very beginning of phase 1. So of course, students will need support with this, but this is for you to get an idea about the type of videos that I created to support you and students in the distance. In this video right here, students have to analyze a piece of a newscast, an excerpt of a newscast. So this box explains the conventions of a newscast, and then you have further guidance right here. As you can see, the multimodal text, everything that was text before became a multimodal text, and the support to understand the type of text it is right below. Here's an email. And again, here is the support to understand the conventions and the purpose of communication. These are the two texts that I showed in the examples. This is a third one. So in the very first unit, you have the three main types, the three main purposes of communication: to inform, to persuade, and to entertain. So in the very first unit, you have the three main texts so that you can refer back to them every time that you need to. And like this, nothing will be a surprise for students. So in terms of assessment, we will be able to design assessments that are reliable and assessments that are valid. One of the things that I wanted to do in this book as well was to add a sense of reality, because listening does not happen in many places anymore as it's promoted in IGCSE, for example. So I actually asked the students, so what do you listen to? Other than when you are watching a series or watching a video, what do you listen to? And what they said is, we listen to podcasts. So one of the things that I incorporated at the end of several chapters is an episode of a podcast that I created specifically for students. And in these episodes, my pace of speaking is slower. I try to recycle the vocabulary of the unit. And most importantly, as I said before, I try to give the students a pattern so that if ever you decide to ask students to produce the text for a podcast, they have an example to rely on. So a big thing that I really committed myself to do in this book is, for every text that I ask students to produce, make sure that I give them an example or two, so that teachers have an example to tell students, look at how the author used the present tense to explain this. Look at how the author began this blog post. Look at how the author ended the blog post, etc., etc. And at the end of each chapter, you have summative assessments. Every chapter has summative assessments that you may decide to do, or not to do that you may decide to use to differentiate, or that you may decide just to add to what you already have already. I will zoom out for us to look at the guiding questions. As I said before, one of the things that I wanted with the guiding question system is to make them more purposeful, so that we teachers actually use them. And so that at the end of the unit, if you want to do a review, the only thing that you need to do is take these questions at the end of your chapter, at the end of your unit, and ask students to answer them. If students are able to answer these questions, that means, hopefully, fingers crossed, that the unit delivery has been successful. So this is unit 2. This is about the statement of inquiry reads as follows. We use different ideas and linguistic elements to explain or to express connections between time and space. So it's about location, it's about prepositions and places and the things that we do in those places. Factual questions: what activities are common in your city? What activities are common in your school? What questions are useful when we want to orient ourselves at a place? What words can help us to express the location of a place? Conceptual questions: how can we use language to express the connections between time and space? Prepositions: how does our culture influence our comprehensions of directions and location? This is a very interesting question that teaching in the Middle East and teaching in China helped to understand the fact that North, East, South, and West is not the same for all of us. And the third question: how do we use language to describe spaces and attitudes in a city? Again, prepositions and adjectives. The debatable question raised as follows: how different are schools in the Spanish-speaking world, or in the world in general? And how do we orient ourselves to understand a city? This has a direct connection with maps. As I said at the beginning of this presentation, for every grammar topic, for every theme, I tried to produce text types that were relevant for that. So for schools, you will see pamphlets, you will see flyers, you will see promotional videos, you will see the timetable. But to make it more interesting, I put it on a website, because we already saw a website before, so that students see that a website can be used for multiple reasons. The text types are shorter, as I said before. I try to give explicit links to grammar, and I include links to videos where students can learn more grammar, again, to support remote learning, or in case you want to flip the classroom, or in case you want to flip the classroom in your classroom. Again, this is a text about school. This is a video right here, and here is the text that help you or will help you support your students to understand the purpose of communication. Let's see. Another multimodal text, again, linked to the information that we see in the city. Another multimodal text linked, again, to the things that we do in a city and the reason why. Here is a blog post with comments, and again, the box that helps you and students understand the purpose of communication and the conventions of the text. And I would like to make a pause and explain the reason why we frame activities in boxes and not in the usual ways that we are seeing in a textbook, where we have it's pretty linear. If you are familiar with my style of writing, you know that I am talking to students and talking to you, and I am telling you what to do. So we cannot, the activities in the book, we cannot just ask students to do them like that. We actually have to guide them, and we have to give them instructions, the instructions that I include for you. And the reason why it's done like that, again, is to support standards and practices. So in some of these activities, we promote collaboration. In some of these activities, we promote pair work, group work, brainstorming. So by reading all the information that I give is how I am hopefully suggesting or informing you which practice of standard C3 you are doing. If everything was like a workbook, if everything was filling in the gaps, if everything was answer question, then I don't think I would be helping you. I don't think I would be helping educators to deliver all the practices in standard C3. So these are the summative texts, the summative activities at the end. And as you know, for the summative assessment of criterion D, we have to, in criterion C, we have to use a stimulus that students must use to produce their text. So the stimulus are included as well. And the assessment for criterion C, which is the speaking one, is already been formatted in 2 ways. For the schools that do e-assessment, as you know, next school year's language acquisition will be part of the on-screen examination. So speaking will be part of the internal assessment. So I have presented the activities in that format. And if schools don't do it like that, the activity is flexible enough for schools to still do it and use it as an assessment. At the end of each chapter, you will see the same questions that we saw at the beginning. And as I said before, if you want to use this as an activity to ask students to answer the questions, this will give you an idea of how they are building their linguistic and their conceptual understanding. And here, there is also another box that you can use to ask students to provide you with questions that they have after doing these activities or these learning experiences. This is chapter 3. And as you can see, the pattern is pretty much the same. All the texts are smaller, are shorter, and the pink boxes that you will see in every chapter are ideas that I included for you to do service with that unit. Another type of multimodal text, reading graphs. And in some chapters, you will see that there will be a lot of pictures. One strategy that teachers can use with the pictures that are there are just to help students pretend that they are sharing those pictures on any type of social media. So how would they label those pictures? What would be the text that they would add to those pictures? How can they turn those pictures into memes? For some blog posts, there are times when students will answer questions. There are times in which we will be asking them to write comments and to agree or disagree. And this will give them another opportunity to practice grammar. And then you have very big infographics like this. And this may be very scary. And if you look at the question, when you see big text like this, these are texts that in this case you will see 4 parts that you can do in 4 different days. And what I am hoping is that if you break this big text into 4 different days, it gives you an opportunity to practice vocabulary in context, grammar, and at the same time link it to a multimodal text so that everything is more explicit for students. And in general, this is the pattern of the book. You have already seen, you have only seen one book. This is for grades 9 and 10, phases 1 and 2. I want to show you this multimodal text here so that you see how I try to link every text to the theme and to the grammar that we're practicing. I'm gonna stop right here for a moment because I am aware that we are going beyond the time. But if any of you have any questions, I will stay longer than what I shared on the invitation in case any of you have any questions. But please do let me know if you have a comment, a reflection, something that you would like to share. And then Liz is asking, will the length of the text be shorter in all the phases? Yes. So for phases 1 and 2, for summative assessments, I follow the guidelines in the guide. So it's I ensured that the extension that they asked us to have is there. For formative purposes, they are smaller. Because one of the things that I have observed as a workshop leader is that many times we do not read that fine print in the guide that students should be able to read text of 100, produce text of 100 to 150 words at the end of the phase, not from the very beginning. That's at the end of the phase. So students should be able to read from 200 to 250 words, for example, at the end of the phase. So I try to expand and to make it longer and longer. Would anybody like to comment something, ask a question?
Rafael, thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation, and I just want that I can have the book as soon as possible, really. Thank you
Thank you,
so much.
Katari. I appreciate that. Placer. Thank you, Katari, for the comment.
Rafa, may I say something?
Yes, please, ma'am.
This is very, very helpful because when planning for any kind of assessment, whether it's formative or summative, you know, in Spanish, it's very hard sometimes to find things like texts for like listening or reading. And this book actually helps you figure out where you can find things and actually puts it all in one book. And it helps you also with you know, guiding students into what they have to deliver. So I'm very thankful, and I'm sure that we will be using this tool. Thank you so much.
No, my pleasure, mate. Thank you for your comment. So what I would invite you to do if you decide to use the books, Fauna, is to first read the statement of inquiry, go all the way to the summative assessment and understand the relationship. And then once you see how the summative assessment is a reflection of the statement of inquiry, go back to the beginning and see how it builds up. So before you do
Like
any
backward planning.
just do that exercise yourself. Just do that exercise yourself so that you know which activities you may actually shift in order. Custody, yes, these books will be available digitally. They will be available at the end of August. And I think in a matter of a few weeks after the paper publication, they will be available digitally. Tatiana, thank you for giving me some time and joining me here.
Sorry, Rafael, for the digital publications, where can we get that? On what website?
Let me give you an example. Let me give you the website right now, Carter.
Sure.
Just give me 1 second. In the meantime, please.
Sorry, for the digital publication, only this book will be available by the end of August, or all the books? I think the date of publication is different for different books, right? As per my understanding.
So the book for grades 9 and 10, phases 1 and 2, it will be available at the end of August, and then at the beginning of September is phases 1 and 2 for grades 6 to 8. The last one that is going to be published is the one for phases 3 to 5 for grades 9 and 10, because this time what that book will include, it includes actually scaffolding for language and literature. So we are seeking permission of the literary texts that I have included. Let me tell you a little bit about that book, if you don't mind. So the book for phases 3 to 5 for grades 9 and 10, I designed in a way that it helps teachers train students to move on to language A if they will move on to language A in NYP or in DP. So in that way, the whole book will help you to deliver the phases 3 to 4. But from chapter 6 to chapter 12, in each of those chapters, you will have literary texts already. And reading will be differentiated. So from chapter 6 to 10, the reading will be differentiated for phases 3 to 4, phases 5, 6, and literature. So that is how that book will be very different. Also, because in Latin America, there is this need of pushing some students to Spanish A. So this book, the last 6 chapters of the book will help students in those schools that want to have Spanish A students.
Qué bien.
I hope that...
not only Spanish A, like if we see the transition table, it will help the students who want to opt the language for, at the HL level at DP.
That is correct,
Specifically,
Bhavna.
phase 4.
And as a matter of fact, Bhavna, all the literary texts that I included, they will be longer than the texts that are required for assessment in DP, but you can use them for training or for reading.
Rafael, me gustaría hacerte una consulta que no me quedó claro. Digamos, la publicación que sería digital va a estar disponible ahora y en finales de agosto o principios de septiembre, va a estar la... Ok, perfecto.
Sí, a principios de septiembre la versión digital ya estará disponible.
Ok, gracias.
Sí. Carta, te voy a enviar eso en un momento, pero lo que me gustaría hacer ahora, si me lo permiten, me gustaría mostrarles algunos de los materiales que he incluido en lo que digitalmente equivaldría al libro del profesor. So this would be for the teacher's book resources. And how I designed these resources are for schools that decide to adopt the books. These resources are mainly for new schools, for schools that do not have teachers with NYP experience and that may need help to writing the documents. So this is what I have done to support those schools. So the teaching and learning materials that I design include a curriculum map, include unit planners, 1 unit planner per chapter, the ATL scope and sequence for the phases, additional project-based learning experiences in case teachers want to do more projects or to do unstructured inquiries. So this is what you see on the right-hand side is the way that I wrote the curriculum map. I follow the template that the IB wants us to use. But as I said before, I tried to find a way to cater to the IB, the current standard and practices, the new standard and practices, to include information for CIS, for those schools that have CIS. And here in the Middle East, there is moral education. So if some schools in the Middle East wants to use the book and want to make explicit links to moral education, I already included that. So from left to right, you have chapter, a synthesis of the unit, the conceptual framework, the know, understand, do. This is backward by design. The summative assessment, service. And in service, I indicated the learning outcomes so that the connection to service as action is explicit, and then moral education. When you see a square in blue, like right now, this is how this particular document gives you evidence for standard C2.1, for C2.3, C2.4, C2.5, C4.1. That's for the current guide. This is for CIS. The complete document gives you evidence for standard B1. The KUD is standard B2 of CIS. Moral education is a standard B4 of CIS, when the one that asks us to consider the local context. B8. And then these ones in turquoise, they are the new standards and practices. So the conceptual framework, it has to do with the culture. The complete document is with the idea of how we document the learning and teaching culture. And that's it. So I designed all the curriculum documents in order to cater to different masters. And here is how I am showing briefly with one example, how every possible thing that an accrediting association is looking for, you will find it here. With regards to ATLs, I did three things. There are three things that I did. Because as you know, there are some skills that are linked to the assessment criteria. And these are the things that we have to do explicitly for formative assessment all the time. Accurate grammar, accurate sentence structure, identifying information in texts, responding to text accurately, interacting using appropriate language, understanding tone, etc., etc. And then there are the skills that are linked to the summative assessment. And when we see the summative assessment texts, we will have to plan backwards. And maybe if this is a new text that we are introducing, that suggests that we have to teach throughout the unit different skills to students. And then depending on the skills that the design of the unit requires us to do, let's say that we decided to do a service-led unit, the skills that students will need are very different. So I looked at ATL skills like this, and I mapped them as follows. So that for each phase, teachers understand exactly what they have to teach, and they decide when they have to do it. And by doing this, teachers will have a checklist of the things, of the skills, explicit skills that they may want to teach to their students. And that's something else that I did with regards to ATLs. These documents that I showed you are more targeting the schools that will adopt the books, that may adopt the books, or the schools that are new in the NYP and will need support with those documents that are difficult to write. But some other schools would like to use them. Well, they will be available digitally as well, but they will take longer.
So these are three different books apart from the books that you have published, right?
This is would be the equivalent of the teacher guide Carta.
Right.
But you know, normally in a traditional book, the teacher guide gives you the answers of the activities and tells you what to do. What is complicated in the NYP is that you have to do surveys, you have to do concepts, you have to do skills, you have to do grammar, you have to do themes, and then you have to articulate all of that. So I prefer to do documents and separate documents so that you know exactly what you have to see. If you want the answers of the activities, you go to the answers of the activities. You don't have to look at the other activity. If you are a new teacher, or if you are the head of the department and you want to show your teachers a curriculum map or to improve your curriculum map, hopefully what I have produced will help you. So if you put them all together, that would be a teacher book for the NYP, but it's unavailable digitally. We did not feel that it was necessary to print it.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rafael.
Yes. No, my pleasure. And with this, my friends, I finished all the resources that I had to share with you. But I will answer any question, any query that you may have. Thank you, Claudia, for this nice comment. And Carter, your question about the curriculum map, each book, so I will be, I have redesigned 3 books. So each book has its curriculum map. And the reason why I decided to do it by book and not by the series is because, as I said, I have only known of new schools that have adopted my books and have taught everything in my book. Only the new schools. You are an experienced teacher, so you may only use some of my units.
Still, but I would like to have that curriculum because it is somehow is going to be helpful because you always have a chance to learn more and more, I think.
And having said that, then you might just take the part of the units that you're doing. So yes, it's more with the book. And then if you decide to use the whole series, then you know that you only have to play Lego and copy paste in different parts, and you will have your articulation. Does anybody else have another question? I'm going to stop the recording right now.